All right, folks, Yishai Fleischer here. Today we're talking about the legacy of President Jimmy Carter. On the one hand, a smiley, nice, classical music listening peanut farmer who became president in 1977. He seems like a nice guy, but in fact, he was maybe one of the most dangerous and formidable enemies that Israel faced. His whole legacy is one of trying to shrink Israel, weaken it, call it every bad name in the book, like apartheid, an occupation, and in fact besmirch Israel's name. And that is really the legacy and the career of Jimmy Carter. There's a lot of media out there trying to portray Jimmy Carter as just a peace-loving lover of Israel who just wanted the best for Israel. But in fact, he was a dangerous enemy. So all that media is really garbage. And on today's show, we're going to take the garbage out because we're the garbage men. And I am joined by my fellow garbage man, Jake Bennet, Israel advocate. Jake, shalom and welcome to the show.
Shalom, Yishai. Happy to be with you today. Let's take out some trash.
Let's do it. Okay, first, let's watch Jimmy Carter in 1978. Now, what he did was that after the Six-Day War, Israel liberated tons of land, including Judea and Samaria, the so-called West Bank, and Gaza, the Golan Heights, and very, very notably, the Sinai Peninsula. Okay, we liberated it from Egypt, and came a man in the name of Jimmy Carter, and he basically was able to use his power against a small country, Israel. He got together with Sadat, with Anwar Sadat of Egypt, president of Egypt, and they colluded together to wrest the Sinai from Israeli hands. How do you want to describe that, Jake?
Shrinker of Israel. And what's the whole point of the Sinai? How did Egypt even get it in the first place? They got it in 1906 in negotiation with the Ottoman Empire as a buffer zone against aggression. Israel needed that place as a buffer zone against Egyptian aggression. Israel won it in 48 and gave it back, won it in 56 and gave it back with pressure from President Eisenhower, and won it again in 67. And Israel needs that buffer. And as we've seen in October 7th of this past year, Israel still needs that buffer because there were 90 tunnels between the Sinai and Gaza where Egypt fed supplies to Hamas that were used to attack Israel on October 7th. So once again, we've had peace agreement after peace agreement. The Carter peace agreement has failed. It's always been a cold peace, and it's absolutely failed, and October 7th is the purest sign of it.
I'm sorry. I have to disagree with you. I think that Jimmy Carter's goal was weakening and shrinking Israel. And the end of his career proved who he was. And so therefore, the Sinai Accords did exactly what it was supposed to do. Exactly what it was supposed to do. Weaken Israel, shrink Israel, make it into a small, little, moral, just, good country, but weak strategically, not on its land, vulnerable to attack, vulnerable to tunneling, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, we're in agreement. We're in agreement because a success for Jimmy Carter is a failure for Israel.
That's right. That's right. And Jimmy Carter, by the way, we're going to watch a clip right now from 1978. You're going to be amazed that during the Sinai Accords, he's barely talking about Sinai. He wrestled away from Israel, 2/3 of its land, gave it to Egypt. But look what he's actually talking about. Let's watch this clip here.
From Washington, here is Walter Cronkite.
Good evening. The committee's summit at Camp David is over, and Israel and Egypt have agreed to two documents taking a giant step toward achieving peace in their troubled corner of the world. Israel has agreed to end its military government on the west bank of the Jordan River and to permit Palestinian self-rule there within 5 years, and to withdraw from the Sinai and to establish normal relations with Egypt. President Carter, President Sadat, and Israeli Prime Minister Begin have now helicoptered down to the White House from Camp David and are about to appear in the East Room there to report to the nation and to the world.
Which will govern a comprehensive peace settlement. It deals specifically with the future of the West Bank and Gaza and the need to resolve the Palestinian problem in all its aspects. And as you will later see in studying the documents, it also provides for the realization of the hopes and dreams of the people who live in the West Bank and Gaza Strip and will assure Israel peace in the generations ahead.
Okay.
It's amazing how he uses the word peace as a weapon. The word peace has never been weaponized so effectively as it has by Carter, and he maintains a laser focus even after he shrunk Israel by 2/3. It took 20,000 square miles of Sinai away from Israel to shrink it down to 10,000, and he stays laser focused on shrinking it more. And when he talks about the Palestinians, it's the next phase of shrinkage.
You know, in back of you, over your shoulder, I see a map of the state of Israel after the 6 Day War, a good-looking map, a state of Israel.
And one right next to it before the 6 Day War, taken by satellite a month before the 6 Day War.
Okay, but I see it very clearly, a big Israel, which is a defensible Israel, an Israel that exists after the 6 Day War as a state that had been attacked many times, now finally pushed back the enemies, was big, robust, badass, a big badass Jewish state. Beautiful.
That map, incidentally, is a reproduction of a page from Ben-Gurion's autobiography, and the title of the map, Israel Today, 1970.
Mm-hmm. Jimmy Carter set out to shrink Israel. And it's really an amazing clip that we just played, because he just, as you said, just took 2/3 of this Israel that was liberated in 1967, gave it back or away to Egypt. And he's not talking about that. He's talking about creating a Palestine in the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people in Judea and Samaria. He doesn't say Palestine yet, but that's where it's going. And that's what he's going to say later in his career. He's talking about creating so-called justice for the people living in Judea and Samaria and Gaza. He already envisions that he's going to shrink Israel much more. He already is envisioning the Oslo Accords. Of course, we have to say in parentheses that there's no way that this would have happened if it wasn't for the agreement of the Begin government. That's a separate problem, why they agreed, why they fell there. But certainly they felt tremendous pressure. In law school, I read the transcripts of the negotiations at Camp David, and it was incessant pressure against Begin, including a few times that the Sadat presidency, the Sadat entourage, packed their bags and were ready to go, and they were going to, scuttle the whole agreement. And everybody was looking at Begin and saying, "Look what you're doing! You're scuttling the accords. You're not bringing peace. You're a man of war, not peace." And he succumbed to that. But in the end, and again, the continuation of Carter's career shows what he was really about. He was pro-Hamas, pro-Palestine, believed that Israel was stealing land, called Israel an apartheidist and an occupier, and that was his goal, to shrink Israel.
I don't know of any other circumstance or instance in all of American history where an American administration has sought to reward an aggressor as Carter sought to reward Egypt. Because in every case that Israel took the Sinai, in all three cases, it was in response to aggression that was killing Israelis, Fedayeen assaults, total army assaults, calls by the head of the Egyptian government to throw the Jews into the sea and destroy Israel. And in every other case that I know where American diplomacy has been involved in the aftermath of aggression, where a defender gained some territory, they backed that defender in holding onto that territory as a punishment to the aggressor and as a buffer against future aggression. But there's a double standard at play against Israel, and we see it with Carter throughout his history. On the cusp of the first Gulf War in 1991, he went and visited in Syria with Hafez al-Assad. He visited with Yasser Arafat. He visited with the heads of Hamas, and he came out of each of those meetings saying, you know what, we can have peace if we can end Israeli human rights abuses, and provide human rights by empowering these people. These were the worst human rights abusers in the world. Certainly,
you're saying that Jimmy Carter met with Hamas and basically saw them as peace partners, or at least personified them, dressed them up as. Let's watch a video.
About it in op-eds. I think we have a clip of that'll be coming up.
Let's play it right now. Let's see him talking about his good friends at Hamas.
You obviously were very successful in bringing peace with Israel and Egypt. Can any deal be done that doesn't involve sitting across a table with Hamas?
I've met several times with Hamas leadership, and I think they are willing to accept Israel to exist peacefully within the 67 borders or some modification of those borders. But the first step has to be to bring Hamas and Fatah together so they can have another honest election. That is a major premise, and I think the 67 borders between the two, with some modifications, will lead to a two-state solution. Netanyahu now, I believe, has decided unequivocally to move to a one-state solution, which every one of his predecessors in the prime ministership have condemned as a disaster for Israel. And I think Israel is now moving toward a disaster for itself and insisting that all the way from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea has to be Israeli controlled. That is a mistake.
Can we, comment on two things there that he said?
I've got two things also. Let me do my things
first.
and then you do yours. Okay, Here's my two things. The first thing is that he has a bold-faced lie. He starts with a bold-faced lie, which is that Hamas is willing to accept Israel in this constellation or in that constellation. That's just a bold-faced lie. That's just telling people lies. I don't believe that he was ignorant of it. I believe that he's lying, but you could claim that he was ignorant. But bottom line is that the Hamas charter lays out clearly that Israel is to be destroyed. And everything that they ever say in Arabic is about destroying Israel.
And you read the Hamas charter. Actually, this was going to be the first point I brought up, so we're on the same wavelength. In the Hamas charter, they define the world as there's Dar al-Islam, the world of Islam, and Dar al-Harb, the world of the sword, and they define every inch of land that was ever conquered by Islam as Islamic waqf, as Islamic holy ground that is to be set aside until the end times. They say not 1 inch of formerly Muslim conquered land is ever to be allowed to be in the control of any other group. So this talk of 67 borders is an absolute fabrication, but it helps confuse and mislead people. And actually, that was going to be my second point, is he talks about 67 borders. There's no such thing, and never was such a thing, as a 67 border. There was a 1949 armistice line. And in the ceasefire agreement, not a peace agreement, but a ceasefire agreement, Jordan said very clearly, and all the Arab countries said, this is not a border. We do not accept this as a border for Israel. This is where hostilities are going to be paused for now until the war resumes. And that ceasefire line was erased in 1967 when Jordan again invaded Israel. So there is no legal binding element to those ceasefire lines in any sense if you're looking at things from a view of law. But if you're trying to confuse people by saying, hey, this land was conquered once by Jordan, therefore it's no longer Israel's, it's this fantasy that doesn't have any kind of a legal or moral grounding to it.
Well, my second point is related to that, which is that he, in that question and answering that question, he just pivots so quickly. And he's like, the real fault here is not jihadism, not terrorism, which he, of course, never uses the word. As we always say here in the Garbage Men, one of the tricks that the Israel shrinkers use is that they never use the term jihadist when dealing with the bad guys. They're always freedom fighters. They just want liberty. They're peace partners. You just give them a little bit of land, right? So that's clear. Right. But the other part is that he just switches to be like, the real problem is that Israel wants to be whole on its land. That's the real issue. It's like, what's that?
Well, he got pushback on a line in his book in that first thing. He said, all of the terror attacks and suicide bombings will come to an end when Israel makes the proper offering of peace. So all the onus is on Israel. He doesn't have any criticism for suicide bombings that blow up pizza parlors and cafes and buses and terror attacks that massacre children in nurseries on kibbutzim.
And of course, he also undermines the very basic theory of the Middle East, which is that people respect strength. A big Israel, a strong Israel, something that's respected, that brings peace, as opposed to what he's doing, which is shrinking Israel, showing it to be weak, showing it to be a thing that is going away, that is emaciated and in time will disappear. That is actually feeding the appetite of the jihad, appetite for destruction. And that's what they want to do. But I personally believe that he was absolutely aware of that. I don't believe that he was ignorant. I don't believe that he was a man of peace. I think that he was a man who had a real issue with Israel. And by the way, recordings are coming out of some of his sermons now. And his sermons show a religious problem with the Jewish people with Israel, who are in his mind Christ killers, etc. And he's got issues with them. He's got issues with the Jews, and he wants to shrink Israel. He wants to undo all the gains of the Six-Day War. By the way, he had another partner later on in life, and that was Desmond Tutu with the whole South African apartheid language. And he indeed wrote a book, Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid. I mean, the book says everything. First thing, what it says is, what do I want? Palestine. That's what I want to achieve. And the other part is like, we'll get peace, because right now what we're getting apartheid is about Israel. Let's take a look at President Jimmy Carter with Charlie Rose talking just about that.
The public perception is of how you view, I mean, this is a book called Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid. I've read what some people have said, and they believe that you have, to use a word some others use, that you are more sympathetic to the Palestinian side than the Israeli side. Do you understand that criticism? And how do you?
I don't agree with it at all. Charlie, I would say that in the last 30 years of my life, if I listed all of the foreign policy goals that I would like to have achieved, bringing peace, permanent peace to Israel would be at the top of my list. I've devoted more of my time.
I just have to pause that to say, what a bold-faced lie that you wanted to bring peace to Israel. You wanted to shrink Israel and to weaken it. But like, look at the veil of like a peacemaker that he is bringing to himself here. This is the way he's presenting himself as a peacemaker. That is just so, it's outrageous that he was an Israel shrinker that brought terror and horror to our country.
There's an expression that I've heard in the American South that when the devil comes, he'll be wearing a nice suit, have a good haircut, and a manicure.
That's right.
And he sounds so much like an actual decent man, Mr. Rogers of blessed memory of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood,
right.
That it
he's
is
the
disarming.
Mr. Rogers he's disarming.
It's disarming. Mr. Rogers was actually a decent man, and here we've got a guy who sounds so refined,
wholesome.
But he twists words and weaponizes words, and he's a man who talks about human rights throughout his whole career, but he applies a double standard when it comes to Israel, when it comes to Arabs, and maybe that's what that's what's known as the racism of low expectations, because he doesn't expect the Arabs to provide for freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, freedom of speech. And even though all of those human rights are denied within the Palestinian Authority-controlled territory, he has no criticism for that. Even though they apply a real apartheid against Jews, where Jews are not allowed to be there, not allowed to buy land, own land, live there. If an Arab sells land to a Jew, they're executed. And they certainly don't serve in the government, the police, etc. He has no criticism for that. And he never applies the word apartheid to the Palestinian Authority or to the Hamas Authority in Gaza, which ruled for many years. But in Israel, where the opposite is true, and all those human rights and all those civil rights are provided for and protected by the courts and by the law, he calls that apartheid. And that is the weaponization of the language of human rights. And that's the devil in a fancy suit.
And it comes back to the simple question: what did he want? What did he want to achieve? And he says he wants to achieve peace for Israel. In fact, his book is called Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid. We saw other videos. Clearly, what he really wanted to achieve was the shrinking of Israel and the creation of Palestine. I have another video about that. Let's finish up this one.
More of my study, more of my effort to bring peace to Israel, and with a commensurate peace to their neighbors, than any other single subject. And the reason for writing this book is really basically to bring peace, a permanent peace to Israel within their own legal borders, living side by side with a Palestinian state in harmony with one another.
As a Christian, as a man who taught Sunday school as a volunteer for years, even after he was president, he has no criticism for the kind of apartheid that exists in Egypt to this day, where non-Muslims are mistreated, where Christian churches have been burnt down by the dozens, year after year after year. During his lifetime, he had no criticism for the apartheid type behavior towards non-Muslims in Egypt, nor in Jordan, where no Jews have been allowed since 1922, since the illegal partition of the land by the British Mandate authorities in the original two-state solution. He has no criticism for the apartheid type behavior in Syria. Yet with all of this destructive behavior and suppression of human rights and oppression, or even within the Palestinian Authority.
And he's
How are
friends with
Christians treated in
Arafat.
Bethlehem?
And he's friends with Arafat. He's friends with Hafiz al-Assad. He's friends with Hamas. He's got no critique for their human rights abuses.
The Christian population in Bethlehem since the beginning of Oslo in '93 has shrunk from around 44% to around 4%. The Christian population in Israeli-controlled Nazareth, on the other hand, has thrived. But he has no criticism for the Palestinian Authority. He never has any words for them. The criticism is only for Israel. There's a double standard and an obsessive negativity when it comes to his view of the Jewish state and how he describes them and makes war through his fancy and beautiful words.
Let's finish up this video with Charlie Rose.
Why do you say peace, not apartheid?
Well, I don't say just that. You left out the first word.
Palestine.
Well, Palestine distinguishes the word apartheid from Israel. I don't allege in any way that within the nation of Israel there's any element of apartheid. In the occupied territories, there is a profoundly disturbing proof of apartheid in its worst form. And I would say it's much more damaging in some ways to the Palestinians under the subjection of domination of Israel, even than the black people suffered in South Africa. So I use the word advisedly of apartheid in Palestine. I also use two other words in there. Peace is what I prefer, not apartheid. And I believe that it's entirely possible for Israel to have peace, for the Palestinians to have peace, if Israel ever adopts the policy of a majority of Israelis, and that is to swap occupied territory, which belongs to the Palestinians, in favor of having peace for themselves.
You know what's amazing is the obsession with territory, the obsession with shrinking Israel. It's all about territory, but he can't give any example of apartheid in the liberated territories in Judea and Samaria. The only example that any critic of Israel ever comes up with, and it's the same one over and over again, is freedom of movement. Why do Palestinians have to go through checkpoints? And the answer is the checkpoints were set up in reaction to terror attacks, bus bombings, suicide bombings, cafe bombings, shootings, stabbings, etc. And that is not apartheid. And it's absurd to even say it, because when you go from your house to Jerusalem, you have to go through the same checkpoints. The Jews are subjected to the same thing. And what's more, and this is even more extreme and makes the point, Jews have to deal with those checkpoints throughout Israel. Every cafe, every bus, everything. Jews are more delayed from all these checkpoints than Arabs are. Arabs only have to deal with it when they're coming into Israel, and then once coming into within Green Line Israel, and then they have to deal with it again at the cafes and buses or whatever. But to call this apartheid and to have, again, no criticism for what he wants to establish, which is a Palestinian state with independence, to be able to carry out full and real apartheid and not allow any Jews to live there, any Jews to have any rights there, much less, even he doesn't even talk about the human rights and civil rights of the Arabs under the Palestinian Authority, where we know from people that we know, when they speak up with any criticism, they get rounded up and tortured. Bassem Eid for 30 days was hung in chains and tortured by the Palestinian Authority for speaking in criticism.
Every Arab that I know that has lived under the PA and has spoken a word positively about Israel has been rounded up and tortured, like you said.
It's a totalitarian, oppressive regime.
That's right.
Period.
Well, he's friends with totalitarian, oppressive regimes.
But he's not a human rights man. Yeah, he's not a human rights man. He just uses those words.
And the other thing is, where does he get this creation of Palestine? Where does he get this idea that there's a Palestine that has rights to this land? Where is that from? Is that from history? It's created out of whole cloth by people like himself. Where does he assert these? He asserts as though we have to take it without question that there's some other people that have rights to this land. And that they have some kind of history in this land, that they have some kind of national rights in this land. And that's part of what he created, which is the narrative of Palestine. He is one of the fathers of the narrative of Palestine, and certainly one of its greatest promulgators. What's that?
And as I said before, as far as national rights for Palestinian Arabs, It was achieved over 100 years ago with the lopping off of 80% of the British mandate for a Jewish state and the creation of Transjordan. Jordan was created to be the Arab Palestinian part. They got 80%. And when the British talked about in 1937 doing another partition, because there was still violence against Jews and run by the Muslim Brotherhood, run by Haj Amin al-Husseini, the precursor and predecessor of today's Hamas, they talked about partitioning it and taking that part that they were going to lop off of what was left from the Jordan River West and attaching it to Transjordan. Because again, the Peel Commission said this will be Arab Palestine. So the Palestinians have a state. It's called Jordan. And all of the Arabs who live in Judea and Samaria had Jordanian passports until the Jordanians revoked them in 1988, which was illegal under international law. And a suppression of their human rights by the king.
So
of
basically,
Jordan.
they have a country called Jordan. It was Jewish land. It is biblically Jewish land. It was lopped off by the British to create a Palestine called Transjordan, later Jordan. And they have a Palestinian state even to this very day, made out of Jewish land. That's the original two-state solution.
And the British never had a legal right to do that because they had been entrusted with a mandate, a responsibility to create a Jewish state in all of that land. And they ignored the international community, who were feeling too weak after World War I to push back. And they decided that they were going to, again, it's in the world breaks down when it comes to this into two parties. You've got the Neville Chamberlain appeasers and you've got the Winston Churchill fighters. And Britain took the route of the Neville Chamberlain appeasers and said, the Arabs are causing trouble. The Jews are quiet. Let's appease those troublesome Arabs. Give them 80% of the Jewish mandate. And then in 37, they came back, said, let's do it again. Let's give them 70% of what's left. And it was rejected.
So we're talking about the consciousness of Palestine, which is one of Jimmy Carter's legacies, support for Hamas, for Yasser Arafat, for Hafez al-Assad, who are all vicious torturers. And also, one of the greatest things that you run up with Jews when you argue with them about the legacy of Jimmy Carter is the Sinai. Israel was a big country relative to the Middle East. It was a bigger country, still small, but it was a relatively bigger country. But it had defensible borders. It had access to 2 lanes of the Red Sea. It had oil. It had airfields, and it had strategic depth. It had a buffer from Africa and from Egypt. It was big. It was a big, bad, strong Jewish state. And what we did was, when we gave it up for peace, we did everything for peace. When you listen to Begin, you hear him talk peace, peace, peace. And it's like you're not getting peace. You're actually getting a cold enemy that's going to allow bad stuff to flow into Israel through this big porous border. And they're going to continue to hate on you. And you no longer have that strength and that strategic depth. You may have a certain kind of peace, but it's not something that'll really hold on. And they'll make a deal with the Muslim Brotherhood to send arms to Gaza. And basically, Israel changed from being a post-6-day war, big, strong Jewish state to a good state, a moral state, a peace state, a justice state, but a weak state.
And a dependent state, a subservient state.
That's right.
Because that Sinai deal has to be put into the context. The Egyptians were agreeing to move out of the Soviet orbit into the American orbit in exchange for money from America. Israel was giving up oil fields and strategic depth and security. And America said, well, we'll give you money too. We'll make sure you have a military advantage in the goods that we give you. And you're going to have peace because we're going to build you up so strong that you wouldn't want to fight because there's going to be too much blood. And this was the fantasy that led to all the wars that have happened since.
That's right.
I mean,
you can make a direct causal link between the Sinai Camp David Accords, the Sinai giveaway, to the Oslo land giveaway, which was already baked in to the Sinai land giveaway, and then to the disengagement, and then to October 7th, a weaker, smaller Jewish state in the Middle East, not respected by the jihad, not feared by the jihad. Okay, we got to finish off, but before we do, we are the garbage men, taking out the garbage and the lies out there. Myself, Yishai Fleischer, and Jake Bennet, Israel Advocate. Jake, thanks so much. A fellow Jew by the name of Stewie Eisenstadt, he's an American diplomat, was America's diplomat. He was the ambassador to the United Nations. He spoke at Jimmy Carter's funeral and waxed rhapsodic about the pro-Jewishness of Jimmy Carter. Let's watch those kind words by Stu Eisenstadt at the Carter funeral.
His faith respected other religions as well. He was the first president to light a Hanukkah menorah. He created the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, which I had the honor of chairing. He had a kosher Shabbat dinner at Camp David for the Israeli delegation and came to our house for a Passover Seder, only weeks after he negotiated the treaty between Israel and
You have been watching.
So Stu Eisenstadt talks about that he lit the menorah and that he sent kosher food to the Camp David, the forcing of Israel to shrink and giving away its land and its strategic depth, but there was kosher food. It's like listening to this is like schmaltz herring on a bagel. Oy, oy, oy. It was like, oh my God, for God's sakes, see him for what it is. Here's a guy that called us every bad name in the world. And, he wrote the book against us, many books. He's anti-Israel, pro-Hamas, pro-shrinking Israel, pro-Hafiz al-Assad, pro the dirtiest crimes against the Jewish people. He took away the great victory of the 6-Day War. Here's an enemy. Call him out. Look at it in the face. Say it. This man's an enemy. But instead it's like, and he lit the menorah. He lit the menorah. He also loved chicken soup. He loved chicken soup. I mean, really, he was the first Jewish president of the United States. Come on, really, we see it. It's beautiful. It's like to hear this kind of stuff is like, it's like to watch some kind of like pathetic, kind of like a, I don't know. It's a Woody Allen-ish type of, like weak behavior. Call it out for what it is. Say it for what it is. He was a dangerous enemy to the Jewish people, and I was embarrassed to hear that tribute to Jimmy Carter as though he was some kind of philo-Semite.
Agree 100%. What more can I add?
Well, we take out the garbage here in the Garbage Men. Jake, I want to thank you so much. I want to welcome everybody to this channel, Yishai Fleischer TV. Huge thank you to everybody who makes it possible to broadcast. Don't forget to support our videos and all that we do by clicking like, subscribing, and the bell. There's 3 different things. You could like, subscribe, and the little bell, okay? And actually, if you do it during or immediately after you watch, this actually works for the YouTube algorithm. That helps a lot. Also, you can become a sponsor of the show and help our projects through going to our 2 domains that make it really easy to support the programming. And here it is, fightforisrael.org. It's a great way to support all of our various projects of keeping Israel strong and sending Torah and Torah from Jerusalem to the world. And of course, buymeacoffee.com/Yishai. We want to finish off the show also by remembering all those soldiers who fought, died, gave up their lives, or gave up their limbs for the fight for this ancient and ancestral homeland. Myself and Jake Bennet both fought for the Jewish state, and we continue to fight for the Jewish state, and that's why you can continue to join the fight at fightforisrael.org. And I ask you to support us because we won't let them shut us up. We won't let them spread their lies without any pushback. We will push back, and you will support us because you don't want them to shut us up. You want the truth to get out there. Jake Bennet, thank you so much for joining me on The Garbage Men.
Thank you, Yishai. It's been a pleasure.
God bless you, and God bless you folks wherever you are. Stay tuned, stay strong, stay connected. God bless our troops. God bless the land of Israel. God bless all the lovers of Israel wherever you are around the world. Stay tuned, stay strong, stay connected, and shalom.